Nasser, I mean, this COP, we knew, I think, back in Sharm el-Sheikh last year, that this will be a different COP in terms of impact and action, and also something that is quite important for Morocco, a reform of multilateralism. We want to have a new face for multilateralism that is bringing solutions, especially to middle-income countries that are taking actually the burden of global sustainability while at the same time working on their own economic development and social development. So for us, I think this COP, beyond being a COP of action and a COP of inclusion, I think it's also a COP where we have to bring in, of course, discuss the global stocktake after the Paris Agreement. We are having, I think, an appointment with history when it comes to adaptation, because we've been focused a lot on mitigation and we needed something more credible on adaptation. So I think the global framework on adaptation that the countries will ratify will definitely be important in that regard. And I think for Morocco, last but not least, having this COP in the UAE is also quite important, because it enabled us also to present ourselves as a country that is a gateway between Africa, Europe, the Atlantic Basin and Asia, being the only interconnected country with Europe, gas-wise, electricity-wise, logistically and culturally as well, since we are hosting the World Cup 2030 with Spain and Portugal, but also a beacon of new forms of partnerships. So we are very happy that His Majesty the King and the President of the UAE signed yesterday this strategic partnership, given, we are hoping, given actually a new impetus for this new generation of strategic win-win global and inclusive partnerships.
Well, let's zoom in on the linkage between climate action and sustainable development in the Moroccan context, which is sometimes not fully appreciated. How is Morocco using climate action to build back better, specifically after the unfortunate earthquakes?
Nasser, this is a great question, because you really have to dive into the complexities of the linkage indeed between climate and sustainable development. And when people say, well, do you really think that climate is the most difficult challenge of the 21st century, after all the wars that we are facing, after the financial crisis that we have faced, after the debt crisis? Today we have, I think, global debt as a ratio of GDP is more than 200%, and after the pandemic that hit the world. And I generally think that the answer is yes. Why is that? I mean, the first reason is because climate is a multiplier of threats, and the world, the Bretton Woods institutions, the multilateral system that we have created in the 20th century is today not equipped to tackle that multiplicity of threats that climate brings in. So when you have a middle-income country like Morocco, or an emerging market like other countries around us, who are embarking on an energy transition program, making sure that they're reforming their energy sector at all costs, ticking all the right boxes to decrease their energy costs, to decrease also the carbon footprint of their energy sector, and at the same time maintaining their fiscal and financial sustainability. I think it's very important to show that today, and that's something that we discussed also in the annual meetings of the IMF and the World Bank in Marrakesh like a month ago, even the financial sector and the insurance sector are not equipped today to tell you, for example, and we've seen it in Morocco, having more than 15 years of experience of developing renewable energy projects. Today, you have some developers who are telling you, I'm not sure I can take on climate risk on a facility, solar, wind, or even hydro, 20 years from now, 30 years from now. And we built all our projects around 20 years, 30 years timelines. So I think the models that we built for the 20th century have to change. After the terrible earthquake that hit the country, we were mobilized very fast around His Majesty the King, may God assist him, to first have an emergency response program to put, well, kids back in school as fast as possible. So the first week, we ensure that all the kids are back at school, and to rehouse the people that were injured and which houses were destroyed. And we put together a 12 billion reconstruction program over 5 years. And the instructions of His Majesty were very clear. We have to build back better. We need to respect, we need to build back. For example, if I take some traditional buildings, we made some tests, and those buildings are energy efficient. You always have, even in the heat of Marrakesh, you have 15 degrees to 25 degrees in the house when it's traditionally built. And we also realize that they withstand, they have a seismic tests, they can withstand some earthquakes. I don't want to give the numbers here, but beyond scale 7. So we realized with the example of reconstruction after the earthquake that if we change the business models and we build, the other example is the mini grids, instead of deploying centralized generation to
especially in remote towns and areas.
Especially in remote towns, in mountainous towns, in the desert, we are ensuring that we are finishing our electrification program in Morocco. We reached 99.8% of electrification, but the last mile is the most difficult and the most challenging to reach, and the most expensive if you use the traditional way to do it. So that's why the mini grids with digital, because our Minister of Education wants to equip all schools with digital access, will enable us to finish our electrification program, but 21st century type.
Dr. Leila, Morocco has revised its NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, back in 2021 with both the conditional and the unconditional targets. Maybe give us a quick roundup of those revisions.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nasser. I think Morocco, since COP22 in Marrakesh, was among the first countries that had an NDC aligned with Paris and aligned with 1.5 degrees target. And in our NDC that we revised back in 2021, we have updated that with a new target of 45.5%. I insist on the 0.5% because my team always insists on that, in greenhouse gas emissions reduction by 2030. And I think we can do better than that, but the most important is indeed the unconditional part. It's 18% of that, 18.3% of that is unconditional. We want to do it with the 61 programs and projects that are contingent of international support and financing. We definitely want to do it in a very careful way, so that the transition that we are going through is indeed gradual, but is taking into account all the financial and technical levers and challenges in that journey. So, for example, I remember when at the COP27 in Glasgow, there was that story about Morocco was aligned with the international community to move away from coal. And I remember, Nasser, at the time, I had to go on stage and put my hand on my chest and swear that we will not build any new coal plant, but I didn't have gas in my system that morning, because Algeria cut the gas to Europe, and Morocco being the transit country, we had 10% of our installed capacity that went idle that morning. So the whole point, and that was 4 months before the Russia-Ukraine war, and I remember I used Ukraine as an example in Glasgow, because Ukraine, to diversify supplies away from Russia, Russian gas, has reversed some pipelines with its neighbors to get access to the international LNG market. And that was coincidentally 4 months before a war that has totally changed the international gas market. So my point here is to say, we need to be more inclusive in the way we look at the different technologies and fuels that will enable us to join, to win this energy transition. And at the end of the day, we need to leave it to the economics of the projects and put in a price on CO2 so that we can tackle the intensity of every technology, instead of just having a blanket approach to our energy transition.
Do we expect any changes with the NDCs coming up in 2025?
We don't change our energy strategy. It's a very simple triangle on which we base everything we do, and it was launched by His Majesty back in 2009. And because we believe in virtue of stability in an energy strategy. So the first key pillar of that strategy, of that triangle, is renewable energy. Indeed, 52% targets of installed capacity by 2020. We had a couple of years of delays, but we reached it. We have now a new target of 52% before 2030, and we are very confident that we will build it, that we will be able to reach it, because we are learning the lessons of the past. The first 40% were the most difficult to get. Now we know how to deploy large-scale and smaller-scale renewable energy projects, even for consumers. Energy efficiency is also an area on which we are putting a lot of investments and thoughts to have creative solutions for energy efficiency on the supply side and the demand side. So we launched a national game last year, and to incentivize any consumer for the first time and get access to any consumer who justifies a decrease in his or her electricity bill will be handed over a bonus for the first time directly in Morocco, and we will be providing the bonuses during the next couple of months for the 8 million people who decreased their electricity bills last year. That's just one example of the type of new methods to incentivize
demand management of sorts.
Exactly.
Your Excellency, finally, you've mentioned the energy crisis that hit the most out of all other areas in Europe, and the goal of their reduction of dependence on fossil fuels, and specifically from Russia. What opportunities does that open up for Morocco, given the history between Morocco and Europe, given those interconnections?
Well, the best opportunity this all opens is the third key pillar of my triangle of the energy strategy, which is regional integration. And when I say regional integration of markets, it's of energy markets, but also of carbon markets. And the way we are doing it is that we are continuing our program of enhancing our connectivity with Europe, with the Atlantic Basin, with the 13 African countries that are around the Nigeria-Morocco gas pipeline, and to ensure that we do that in a very, I would say, integrated way. So as I mentioned earlier in this interview, Morocco is the only country that is interconnected with Europe gas-wise and electricity-wise, but also bi-directionally. And as a European foreign minister told me once, with optionality comes a lot of empowerment. So this is how we craft our win-win partnerships with the European countries. And of course, having that great potential for the future hydrogen, green ammonia and methanol economy, we want to ensure that we do that while making sure that for maybe the first time in history, Africa might be able to export developed materials, and instead of just exporting raw resources.
And climb up that value chain.
And climb up that value. But to reach that, we still have, as Morocco, to multiply our annual investments in the energy transition value chain by 5 annually starting 2023, between now and 2030. This is just a business as usual case. I'm not taking into account all the big desalination program that we have that will be fired by renewable energy. I'm not taking into account the new hydrogen economy that is coming up.
That's specifically for the power sector.
That's mostly for the power sector. So a large part of it is, of course, the grid. Morocco, like other countries, have been under-investing in the grid until now. So we are ensuring that we are multiplying our annual investments in the grids by 4, strengthening it, but also putting more storage so that we can cater for the intermittency of renewables. So 52% of renewables before 2030, but a lot of investments in the grids, in storage, and of course in the gas infrastructure that will enable us to prepare for this new hydrogen economy.